I am. That means we're on. Okay, just barely? That's probably for the best. So, what we're going to do now, we have Building a Blockbuster. This is all about the creation of the Disney-MGM Studios. I think it's important, if we're going to spend 2 days with these incredible people who created the park, we should get to know a little bit more about them and about their process and about how we got to the finished product of the park. So we have, I'm not going to bother introducing everyone individually yet. I just want everyone to say who you are, what you did on the project, and your road to WED or WDI and to the Disney-MGM Studios project, if you can give us that in short. We'll start. Laine, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Laine Dunham White. I started on the project in 1987 when I applied to Imagineering, and I was assigned to Bob's team, and then shortly after to, I believe, Richard and Tom Fitzgerald to support their work. And I ended up working on backstage walking tour, the special effects tank, the special effects shop, the special effects stage with the B-Butt, and the tour stage.
Thank you for B-Butt.
I'm Ryan Harmon, and imagine being 4 months past your teens and getting an interview with a producer named George Head at Walt Disney Imagineering, where you've dreamed of, working your whole life, and being asked to be his assistant on a new project called the Disney-MGM Studios. And that was me, 20 years old, getting to work with Bob Weis and Tom Fitzgerald and Laine and all these amazing people. And I got to work on Bob's slideshows and putting presentations together and working in concept meetings and coming out here on the site, driving around in golf carts on the dirt paths. And this was the fourth Disney theme park in America to be built. So to be 20 to 22 years old and have that opportunity was just mind-blowing. And I thank everybody here for my life. It was amazing.
I didn't get to do this in the opening because we were running a little late, but Ryan is a big part of why all of us are here. Ryan was a huge help in putting this together and getting everyone on this stage. So thank you. Thank you, Ryan. We really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Paul Osterhaut, and I started the Imagineering, actually WED, in 1980, and I worked on Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland and New Fantasyland, and as Bob mentioned earlier, a darkness swept over WDI in 1984, and I was swept up in that darkness. One of my good friends is Joe Rohde, and Joe and I would hang out a lot, and somewhere in the mid-'80s, he said, hey, I'm working on something cool and different. Would you consider coming back to Imagineering? And I was like, yeah, of course. So between 84 and 87, when I got back, I had worked in television. I had done like 600 commercials and television shows and movies and stuff. And so I got called from professional staffing, and I went in for an interview, and they said, great, we'd love to have you back. And I came back, and they said, okay, we're assigning you to studio tour. I'm going like, that's not Animal Kingdom. So, I don't know, at some point, Bob saw my resume or Steve Miller or somebody and said, oh, this guy works in television. We know where he's going to work. So I was assigned to the AV complex, and the AV complex became Monster Sound Show and Superstar TV. And so that's where I started. At some point in the middle of production of all of that stuff, I got called into Bob's office, Bob and Tom Fitzgerald, and Bob said, hey, we're starting up this Star Tours thing, added expansion. We need to find a producer. And they kind of looked at me, and I go like, well, let me see, who could do that? and Bob goes. And so I got promoted to producer in Star Tours, and that started an incredible second half of my journey at Imagineering.
I'm Eric Jacobson. I started as a performer at Disney Entertainment at Disneyland. And then in 1977, I started the model shop at Imagineering. And then when Epcot was being built, I was picked to lead the group that did all the aesthetics for all the AA figures for all the opening day Epcot shows. And when that was done, Bob realized that I had that history with AA figures and asked me to be the leader, producer, art director for the Great Movie Ride. And so that's what I did in this project. And it was one of the highlights of my entire career.
have a mic down there.
I'll take this one.
Wait, he has to say what character he played in the park.
Oh, yeah, what did you do in
Eric, who
entertainment?
are you?
What's that?
What did you do in entertainment? They want.
I started as the rear end of a Jungle Book elephant. That was really my very first job, $1.80 an hour. But then I did. I was Goofy in American Parade, and I played Prince Charming and Prince Stefan from Sleeping Beauty, and many other characters.
I love that Bob is picking on you. Bob couldn't even bundle balloons.
Hi, I'm Craig Russell. I started at WED in 1980, working next about this far away from Bob Weis on the Tokyo Disneyland project. Spent 3 years doing that, and then saw that wave of darkness coming that Paul referred to, and got ahead of it and left WED and went off and did about 3 years worth of work outside in the same industry but outside. And when the phone rang, and it was this guy Don Edgren, who was kind of Walt Disney's engineer in a lot of ways, who I'd worked for in Tokyo very closely, and he said, "Okay, you've been working mostly show and ride before, and we've got this big sort of facility project engineering role we want you to do, working for this awesome guy by the name of Art Henderson." I just didn't even, I don't even think I asked what the salary was. I just kind of ran back to Disney and promised myself I'd never leave again. So that's what brought me back to this job. I came onto the studio, and was the role was this, again, Art was sort of the design, the architecture, engineering, to some degree construction design leader, and I worked for him, focusing on the studio for quite some time, and then sort of expanding into the rest of the park as architecture, engineering, and construction, sort of in a way the arbiter of the grand experiment with Bechtel that Randy spoke of. So that was a role.
Kind of went on after that. After that, yeah, Craig, important guy in the history following that as well. I actually started in 1972 in Fantasy on Parade at Disneyland as Dale the Chipmunk. I'm Chris Brown.
Okay, now we know. That's helpful.
Sorry about that. Oh, my name. No, not going to do that. That's fine. Anyway, then I started working in Disneyland and retail merchandise in California in 1976. And about a year and a half later, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because I loved passion entertainment. And I was studying mechanical engineering because I love inventing, creating, and building things. And I couldn't figure out how I wasn't going to end up designing jet fuel transfer pumps in the basement of something in Santa Ana. I'm like, I can't do this. And then I was standing there managing the bookstore and went, this is what I want to do. I'm standing right in the middle of it. So I became quite a pain in the ass, and it spent a year and a half and 4 interviews telling them I wanted to work for WED. And they're like, we don't hire people like that. So it just was a huge journey. I always hear these stories of people, oh yeah, I got a call, and I went, and I'm like, oh my God. I killed myself to try and get in this door. So I created a co-op program which never had existed in engineering. 1979, I transferred up to WED and gave blood for Epcot and the birth of that, Spaceship Earth and Journey into Imagination. And then during the dark days, our department went from 150 odd people down to 7, and I was still there. Then it went to 6. But I was the last one laid off, and I was one of the first ones called back, and I came back. My second time, I think Frank Wigan was there the same day I got through orientation. There's Frank in the back. So that started with Star Tours and a bunch of other different things. We went for Anaheim. And then I went to a meeting with Brock and Eric and Bob actually, Great Movie Ride. So I was the ride engineer for Great Movie Ride, and that was a whole evolution. They'd mentioned a little bit about this, but when we had the staff to do Tokyo Disneyland and Epcot, it was a huge group, and we built a lot of stuff in-house. And when it came time for a studio tour, it was like, okay, you're the engineer for the rides and stuff. I'm like, and the rest of the team? And they're like, no, that's you. So it was like, okay. So this became a design build project, and when I started writing the specification for Great Movie Ride, they were like, we don't like design build. That doesn't work well. Like, well, we're doing it because there's no other way. So we went through that. We'll get to those stories, obviously, talking about that. But then it expanded into oh, there's a lot of safety stuff in this attraction that you should really look at too. So it became that, and then it was like, hey, we got some more money out of Michael and Frank. Let's figure out what we can do with it. And so Richard Vaughn and a few of us sat around, and he came up with this extraordinary idea of her Catastrophe Canyon. And 13 months later, that was running the first water test. And it was just like one thing after another. Bob would call like, hey, we want to add this dip truck thing to the back lot. They got it from the movie. Go figure out how to make it work. So it was just one thing after another. And Indiana Jones, again, we'll talk more about that later, but it sort of expanded into everything. And that was an extraordinary time, the most incredible team we've ever worked with, and a great opportunity, and glad to be able to share it with you guys.
I'm Brock Thoman. I got my start at WDI, or WED at that time, of course. Right out of college, I graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in architecture, and started in the architectural drafting department, eventually moved into the show set design department, and from there worked on several projects, including over in Tokyo, putting in Tokyo Disneyland, Epcot Center, early design stuff, and then had to leave it when I went over to Tokyo. But was asked to come on board the show, or the studio tour project, to work with Eric and the others in the Great Movie Ride and the show set part. And because of my architectural background, we knew we wanted to do our castle, the Chinese theater, and so that was my little baby there. And there's lots of stories we'll be telling as we get into that show later on, but that's kind of where or how I got there, and that's what I worked on. Of course, I also worked with Paul Osterhaut at the end. I stayed on after the opening before going back to California to work on the Ewok Village for out in front of Star Tours and to finish up the installation of that show. So that's where I was, or how I got there and what I did.
I'm Richard Vaughn. In 1979, I was to meet with a guy named Bob McKeegan, who was an artist at a place called WED. I had been on a search. I was trying to get a job as a sketch artist in the motion picture business. And if I couldn't talk to somebody, I would ask them to give me a name. Somebody gave me Bob McKeegan's name, and he was working at this inauspicious, boring place in Glendale. And I had made an appointment to meet with him, and when I walked into the lobby, Millie, you guys remember Millie? So Millie told me that Bob wasn't there that day, and I was disappointed. I folded up my portfolio, and I was headed to my car, and before I could leave the lobby, she said, oh, you could talk to Herbie. And she meant Herbie Ryman. And she got on the phone, and he walked downstairs in a smoking jacket and an ascot tie. And he was the nicest, sweetest guy, and, you know, interviewing with somebody like that, you get nervous. I had no idea who he was, and I had no idea where I was. And he said, he looked at my portfolio, and he said, you need to talk to Maggie Elliott. So he said, no, I'll walk you down there. So he walked me down the hallway, and I looked on the walls, and on both sides of the hallway were large silkscreen prints of the Disney rides and attractions like Adventureland and Swiss Family Treehouse. Was it Swiss Family Treehouse? Okay. And I said, Mr. Ryman, what do you guys do? What is this place? And he said, why, young man, we're the ones that build all the attractions for the Disney parks. And we build the Disney parks, and it's all done here. And with a flourish, he opened up the door to the model shop like this. And there was the Epcot Center model that filled up probably twice as much space as this audience. And my first job was working on the model for Spaceship Earth. When we went into production, I followed that to the Tahunga production facility. And then I went to Florida. And then we had the dark times. And some of us who survived just scrambled to invent stuff, and I did some stuff for ImageWorks, I think. But then Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came on board, and it was like the Age of Enlightenment had just drove through the front door with a truck. It was amazing. And so, you know, we were all buoyed and all excited. And I remember I was loaned to the LA Children's Museum by by Marty, and because Michael Eisner's wife had worked on the Children's Museum. And, you know, I kind of did that whole thing myself. And Bob and I had offices on the same floor in the same wing. And when the time came to start Studio Tour, Bob asked me if I could work with him on it. And because, in his words, I was doing everything on the Children's Museum myself, and I guess that was impressive. Okay. So anyway, I was involved in a backstage tour, concept meetings, which ran every day, all day, for weeks and weeks and weeks. I was good at the 5x7 cards. I was good at that. And then I would do illustrations for the sound stages and the special effects, the water effects, and that kind of thing. And then we got the word that Michael was a little concerned there wasn't anything in the nature of a thrill ride for the backstage tour. And so I don't want to give away that. We have a talk about that.
Yeah,
so I'm just
save
going to
that,
pass this
please.
on. We opened, and it was really good.
Hi, I'm Phil Bloom, and I've had a really amazing career in this business. A lot of amazing attractions I've worked on, and I'm still in the middle of an amazing career in it. And I feel very lucky to be part of this career and doing this stuff. But this was my first job. This was my first job in the industry, and I was a baby. I didn't know what Imagineering was before I showed up. But not a day goes by that I'm laying out rides, I'm doing stuff, I'm doing attractions, but I think of Lane Hauser on the studio, on the backlot stuff, saying, oh my God, remember she taught me that stuff. And Paul, when I was on the TV stuff, I was this young guy on the park, and I volunteered for everything. So every store, restaurant, walking thing, theater, ride, show, I worked on part of it. I got show set drawings for all that stuff. And I'd be on the site, I'd be so excited to be on the site. Hey, there's a truck coming at 3 in.the morning. I'll come in at 3 in the morning and meet that truck. I just would do anything just to stay on the site all the time. And but like Chris and Brock and Richard, I just think about you guys all the time in terms of the lessons I learned at the very beginning of my career is still this team is what made my career. And this is all the lessons I learned. I constantly go through all the time now. So this was the great team. This is how I got my career started, and this is why I'm really glad to be back on stage here with these guys, because it was a really great start for me.
So I need to add that last year Phil was made a TEA master at his craft. Now you teach.
So I love, you just set me up perfectly. Phil and Ryan, you got to sit under this learning tree. The rest of you sat under the learning tree of basically the first generation of Imagineers. You are the second generation. What was that like leading into this project to learn from the people who essentially created the art form?
Bob, you want to go? I'll go. I'll start.
Everybody got started.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll tell two versions of the same story. In Tokyo Disneyland, again, as I started with my introduction, Bob and I had the thrill of being a part of a very, very small team doing, 4% of WED was doing Tokyo Disneyland, 94% of WED was doing Epcot, is the numbers I remember. And so we were small and lean and mighty, and there was this group of Walt's guys who somehow just didn't fit into Epcot. And so they were sort of the misfits of Epcot, and they were cast out because they knew Magic Kingdoms and they knew, the attractions. And so we got to learn directly under, the better, say 8 or 10 of these fantastic, the Mark Davises, Claude Coates, these, Bob Gers. And so that was direct learning from the first generation. The studio was then, for me personally, the first time, okay, now we're alone. Now Walt's guys are gone, and they've gone off and done other things. So it was oddly not scary because, again, you'll hear time and time again about how tight this team was. I think we just had a lot of confidence. We knew what we were doing. We had a lot of confidence in the leadership. And I don't think I really spent much time thinking about the fact Walt's guys are gone. I think we felt we knew what we were doing and we knew how to get this thing done. That's my version.
So when I first came to Imagineering, I was in the model shop, and I was really, I love attention to detail. And then they divided the model shop up into building models for Epcot and going to do production at a facility we called Tahunga, which is in North Hollywood. So I was plucked out of the blue to go to Tahunga to work in figure finishing, and I thought, figure what-ishing? What is that? But what that is the art of taking the automatronic robots and make them look human and make them look like animals and make them look real. And so they assigned me that, and I loved it. It was just really great. And Laine Gibson and Wathel Rogers, you all know those names, they were sort of my mentors and helped me craft that, work to craft that art. And I was assigned to figure finish Ronald Reagan for the Hall of Presidents. And I really, really got into that. And back then it was looking at magazines and watching him on television. We didn't have anything except print stuff to work on. And they were so impressed by what I did, they actually asked that I become the supervisor of the figure finishing department. And so because of that experience, when it was time to do the Great Movie Ride, I was sort of the person that was carrying the torch of audio animatronics into that next generation. So that's how I became that part. And that was my mentorship from those great people.
I got it more from my days at Epcot, working with Yale Gracie and Exitensio, and Ward Kimball was the art director on transportation. So there was that sense of my mentorship was Epcot. And then when I came back, it really felt like we were our own group without influence from anybody. And it's possible that a lot of those people were busy on Paris or other projects, but it seems like with the studio tour, you ever been on a project or you're doing something and there's more experienced people with you, and so you feel this weight off your shoulder because I'm working with somebody really experienced? Yeah, I never got that on studio tour. I kid. We all work together, knowing we're gonna figure this out. We just had this confidence, and maybe some people would say arrogance, that we're just gonna figure it out, and we did. So.
You're taking the feedback?
Yeah.
So I went to school at Art Center College of Design, and a lot of my fellow students, what their dream was to go work at Disney. And I would look at them and say, I'm going to be a real artist. That was not my goal. So I hit the pavement pounding, looking for work, and ended up with my tail between my legs, going back to one of my professors, Fred Hope, who had a company, the only company. And so I figured I'd go work there for a while, till I get my feet on the ground. And darn, I got bit by the bug. The first project I worked with Craig when we worked on Auto World in Flint, Michigan. And from there, went on to work at Knott's Berry Farm in design and planning, did a couple projects there, and felt like, I had to wear 10 hats there. And I felt confident enough then, okay, let's go to the big guys, let's go to Disney. And so that was the time I did that. And it really was amazing, the sort of language and the things that had been handed down through generations, and just by osmosis and really working was really phenomenal. Really good experience.
Rolly Crump. Ta-da. Rolly Crump was one of the patriarchs of WDI, along with Mark Davis and Ward Kimball and the gang at Exitensio. And Rolly Crump came up with this idea. This is in 1980, I think. And he came up with this idea of having the new hires that they brought in for Epcot Center, and there were a lot of us. But we were missing some of the background and some of the legends and some of the mythology around WDI. And he started a program called the Designer Enrichment Program. And that changed my life. First of all, it took the seriousness out of what we were doing. It's probably not a good idea, but it took the seriousness because every night that we had those meetings, there were anecdotes and jokes, and they were revealing parts of themselves that made them human. And so it took away the awe when we worked with them, and they just became regular folks. But the lessons they taught were astonishing. And I soaked that up like a sponge along with a lot of other guys. I was actually, Walt Paraguay was in our group of acolytes. And he took it as a personal affront. So these guys would tell stories, and eventually it wound up a little like this. They would be talking about background and their misadventures and some of the shortcuts they used to take. These were all street lessons that we were given in designer enrichment. And Bob was in it. A lot of people up here were in design enrichment. And it really was a valuable program, and I wish they would do it again.
Yeah, I can add to that because that changed, I think, my direction at Disney even. And I'll go ahead of that for a second. When I came there from college, as I said, I did the interview because they were, when you first graduate, you interview with anybody you can because you need experience interviewing, trying to get a job. And so I came back from another interview with a big developer down in Orange County, and I got word that Disney was on campus and they were interviewing architectural students. So I thought, well, okay, let's try this. And I did it, and I figured halfway through my interview I'd blown it because I didn't have a way to show them slides, and that's the only thing I had to show them my work because my main photographs of all my work for 4 years at school had been lost in the mail. So anyway, we're looking at slides, up in like this. And so I thought, well, chalk that one up to experience. I end up getting a call saying, we want to hire you. Came down to see what it is they did, because I'm going like, okay, it's Walt Disney, and it wasn't my dream to work at Walt Disney. My dream was to be an architect. But, okay, this is kind of interesting work. It's a little different. It'll be a good 4 or 5 year experience, and then I'll go do real architecture. But as the old adage is, you get showbiz in your blood, and you're hooked. I think Laine put that well, too. And then the designer enrichment program, I was on one of those, and that really changed. Out of the group I was with came the new Fantasyland project at Disneyland when they redid Fantasyland. And what that allowed me to do was I, along with another individual, and I unfortunately can't remember his name now because he left Disney a couple of years later and never came back. We worked on the new Snow White ride at Disneyland, and we got to do everything from designing the ride. I was in show set design by that point. So I did the layout of all the sets and the ride itself. We built models for it. We painted the models. I got to work with scenic artists and learn the process of how you paint a model or paint a scenic. And this is stuff I would never have learned in architecture school, would never had a place to apply it. But by doing that, gave me those experiences that then allowed me to be pulled into other projects, and I think is one of the reasons why I was asked to be on this, because of my background and what I had shown I can do with that sort of thing. So yes, that designer enrichment program was incredible because we got to hear every week from one of the old guys, what we called the old guys at that time, but what they imparted to you was just fantastic, and it's something. It's too bad that program doesn't exist at WDI now for us and others that have even followed us to impart that information to the new employees. But anyway.
You want to keep moving? I just wanted to add well, everybody here has stories, believe me. So it's
That's why we're here.
Exactly. I just remember, because when I transferred up there, I was, I'd come from the parks, and I just was amazed at lots of things. And it was such a small and open-minded community of professionals. So I remember bumping into Claude Coates. Hey, come here and let me show you what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm an engineer in ride systems, figuring out stuff, and was working on Big Thunder Mountain track switches. But there we are. And I was in the Mapo building. That was a building built from the first run release of Mary Poppins Prophets. And downstairs was where all the classic photos you see of Walt standing there with the animatronics for Tiki Room, all that stuff was all built there. And it's like walking down and seeing it all. And I just was a complete sponge. I remember thinking at the time, I just want to be someplace where I'm the dumbest person there and I can learn every single day. And I just learned so much. I just wanted so much more. And going down, and I would talk to people in the shops. And when I was designing something, I said, well, you've got to build this. How does this work? And they said, nobody from engineering's ever come to talk to us. And I'm like, but you have to build it. So that makes no sense. So it was just, everybody was very open and collaborative, and I had an extraordinary experience there, learning from all these people. And the saying at the time was, you don't retire from Disney, you die there. Because these people had been there a long time, and they were still there. And it is something that just you get addicted to, and it's very, very difficult to step away.
I've got one I'll tell. We were sorry.
That worked.
Lucky enough to working with Richard and working with the animation group to have several sessions that Roy Disney attended. Roy Disney, Walt's nephew, and the guy who had made True Life Adventures, and if you've ever seen a picture of Roy, when you look in Roy's eyes, you're like talking to Walt Disney. I mean, he looked exactly like Walt, and he'd walk into a no smoking conference room, and he'd put it was no smoking for everybody except Roy, and he would chain smoke. We all have Roy's secondhand smoke in us. So the DNA was passed on, but Roy was a very calming force. He was a wonderful gentleman, and I got a call when we were down at the site, and he said he and his wife would like to take a little site tour. So I took his wonderful wife, and we just kind of walked down Hollywood Boulevard to the center hub. He had already been backstage, and we had taken these little bits and pieces of Hollywood Boulevard from all over the place in Hollywood, and we had made them kind of types, so Spanish colonial or deco or whatever. And his wife started saying, that's where I went to the dentist, and the second floor. And he would say, oh yeah, we used to go to that deli right there. They recognized all of the types that they were seeing. And we walked in to the Brown Derby, and Roy runs in. He knew exactly the layout, which we had taken from Hollywood. He knew the layout. He runs in, he goes up to the 3 steps, and he sits in a booth. And he says, this is where I used to sat with my uncle and my father and have lunch. And the little hat, the little bronze hat was there. It was just a great experience.
So we have a lot of individual panels on attractions and stuff, but you mentioned Hollywood Boulevard. Can we talk a bit about that? Obviously, the Chinese theater we'll talk about with the movie ride, but what is the thought behind that Hollywood Boulevard? What was the scale is it's more of the Disneyland scale, right? It's much smaller than Main Street at the Magic Kingdom. Can you talk more just about designing, picking facades, that sort of stuff for Hollywood Boulevard?
Yeah, I can take that one probably. That I wanted to do Main Street again because I just love Main Street. So we went out and on several trips and looked at just what Hollywood looked like as a conglomeration of so many different things. And I remember I shot a bunch of photos and took them to 1 hour photo, if anybody remembers what that was. And I taped them on a big board, and I had a meeting with John Hinch, who was the head of Imagineering's entire artistic side. And again, somebody who worked with Walt Disney and Salvador Dali, and an amazing career. And kind of sheepishly come in with these, including the idea of doing billboards on top of some of which is so characteristic of that part of Los Angeles. And he was very positive, and his number one message was, he said, because he lived in that era, he said it was about exuberance. It's exuberance. So whatever it is, push it over the top. And so we really got a kind of a endorsement from John to be able to do those crazy buildings. And we, I remember I walked Main Street to make sure we had the dimensions right. The block is 400 feet long, which is what Main Street is. The width is 55 feet. We were really trying to do that, but with the charm of Hollywood. And it was just really, really, really fun to do. And it's really great to see it still there.
I just have to say, was it a smaller scale because of a half-day park?
It was a smaller budget, that's for sure.
The other thing that's been said, Brock brought up slides. I want to talk about technology. Building a theme park at the time you're building it. I know we have some younger viewers watching for sure. Are there particular stories or processes that would date this project? What were you doing at the time that might date the project?
Well, we'll talk about this in the Great Movie Ride and more, but really think about I mentioned magazines and TV with Ronald Reagan, but we had VHS tapes, and I can't tell you how many VHS tape machines we wore out by stopping and starting and rewinding, and we've got to get the expression of the witch at, no, you missed it, go back again. And the technology was very, very crude, but we figured it out, but it was just not as easy as it is today.
I got my first Apple computer, the little boxy Apple, after this project was finished. That's the first time we got computers on our desks, 88, so.
Only one. Cindy was the only one that had one in 88. She's showing off still about it.
This was a time when if we had a drawing or a piece of information in California that needed to get to Florida the next day, you'd find somebody, buy a seat on Delta, give them the package, and they would fly down and deliver to us here in the field. FedEx didn't exist, email. I don't even think we had fax at that point in time. It was, okay, who's available? You don't have anything to do? Get on the airplane.
And you would go in every day to the office or twice a day to look at the inter-office envelopes to see what communication you got from California. That's how it was. And also, we didn't, as you said, Randy, we didn't have cell phones, but we had radios. So to know what was going on, and beepers, pagers, yeah. So that's the world we were living in.
So I would say too, I would say too that the technology on the backstage walking tour we just look at the equipment here and the equipment we use to film, and all the whole thing for the tank with the dump water tanks and the winds and stuff, and everything is generated now CGI. So I think a lot of that would have been very outdated.
A large number of the old men who were there when we were working there were illustrators, Mark Davis and Ward Kimball, and there's so many others. But that whole department was structured around acrylic paints, and we never used oil because we were in a building, but we generated all the renderings for all the rides and attractions, in our offices, and we used the full battery of brushes and acrylic paints and everything else. And as time went on and I moved on, then people would come and sit down and say, where's your workstation? Or, how are we going to get this, generated? And everything, it just flipped. And I think a lot of the old guys would have probably directed somebody to do something, but they wouldn't have done it themselves. So that was one of the biggest things that happened in illustration, was the fact that everything keyed over to Photoshop, and all the apps that are built and designed for free thinking and generating images immediately. But you didn't put them in an envelope and put them on the plane and send somebody to Florida. You just send a file.
From the standpoint of the drawings we had to do for these, it was all hand drafted with pencils and rulers and straight edges of different, and triangles and things like that. And every time you had to make a change, and that happened a lot, in the design process, you'd go back to that piece of vellum and you'd erase something and you'd draw something else. So by the time we got the final drawing ready for it to be, for the actual construction, that piece of vellum was like holding a rag cloth in your hands. I mean, it started off as this nice stiff piece of paper, and now it was very tender. You had to be very careful with it. And so, and every time you made a change, you had to go back and have it blueprinted by the blueprint machine and wait for it to dry. Or sometimes when we had the newer stuff, it was just an ammonia-based thing, but you still had to wait. You had to put it in the window and wait for it to come out versus just click a button on your computer and it prints out a new clean page that's already there, and you don't have to erase anything because you just go back and redraw it, and so the original drawing still looks pristine. So that's some of the difference in the technology today, and I'm sure it's even gone further, and also with the new technologies, you can electronically send that. So again, we wouldn't have to put it on an airplane. You would just have it in your computer within minutes, and you could print it out at that location. So that's some of the difference that we had to deal with.
Yeah, it was not CAD, it was paper drawings for ride vehicles and everything else. And our vendor for the Great Movie Ride was in Detroit from the Specialty Car Manufacturing Group. And so everything was drawn there on paper, and then it's sending things back and forth and then physically going there to review it as it comes together. And I keep flashing back to Epcot days, which was really different than what we're doing, because that technology and sneaking in and taking a memo off of an executive's desk and going in and carefully having a word removed and retyped so that the secretary wouldn't have to retype the whole page. Those days are kind of gone. So, but it was building relationships with people so you could get things done, because there was no email, there was no word processing, we didn't have anything like that all that way back.
Yeah, obviously we didn't have cell phones, so we didn't have instant cameras. We did have instant cameras. We took Polaroids. If you needed to capture something and keep it right away, you go Polaroid. Just getting ready for this whole weekend, we all went through our stuff, and I'm going, wow, I sure took a lot of Polaroids. And the color held up. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail of some technology stuff when we get into Muppets, but we invented a lot of stuff in Muppets that didn't exist. And I'm sure everybody here has a story about something that they invented because it didn't exist and you had to solve a problem, so you invented the solution. It was, whenever something happened that everybody needed to know, you'd be in a meeting, everybody's beeper would go off at the same time. Like everybody would, oh, Michael's on the site? What? Or something, whatever. But that was all beepers and walkie-talkies, radios, yep.
I just want to mention, I'm a big fan of Apple's Keynote software, PowerPoints, putting visual presentations together. But back then, Bob would ask me to put together slideshows. So we had a slide librarian named Pat. What was her? Pat. What was it? Pat Sellin, that's right. She was this little woman with white hair, bigger than she was, and glasses, and she taught me. I would sit there with a loop, and she helped me understand what makes a good image and how to assemble a story literally in carousels of slides. And we would have to set up the slide projector for the presentation and the screen, and it was so time-consuming, but I learned so much doing that. And the other thing about the cool 80s was people like Phil and Neil Engel and Deb Rager and all the set designers would bring their Sony Walkmans, and they would sit at their drawing tables, and you had it hanging from the ceiling or something, wasn't it? It was like hanging with their little cassette tapes playing in it. And it was the 80s. It was totally cool.
To pile on what Brock and Chris said, now, this is where I first learned how to lay out rides from these guys when we were doing Great Movie Ride. But Brock, when we drew it, we didn't have to draw it once. We had to draw it in 1/8" scale, and then 1/4" scale, and then 1/2" scale. And then Chris would change the ride path, and we'd got to go erase that ride path. And then we got to draw it again and get my circle template out and my compass out and draw it again at 1/8" scale and 1/2" scale and 1/4" scale. And then he'd do it again. But doing that, learn how to lay out rides.
just something to flash me back to something. Again, we'll talk more details about things, but for technology evolution, when we did Catastrophe Canyon, which Richard like carved up a bunch of foam to visualize in 3D his idea, and then we bandsawed that like every inch, and this guy got to take those things and lay down and trace around the edge of each section so that you developed basically drawings for each rockwork cage, because it's not now, you don't even do, sometimes you actually do still do the foam model, but then you just scan it, and then it's like, okay, you want to view it, well, here you go, what scale, what perspective do you want? And it was foam and foam dust, by the way, really nice, and then him drawing every single thing there so we could figure out how to transfer this crazy vision from Richard's head into foam 3D and then into things that we could actually build. And by the way, we have no time, so do it faster.
I know you and Valerie are going to talk about Laserdisc up next. So yeah, I feel like we're in Carousel of Progress right now. Laserdisc, high def TV. We didn't have CAD. In the Zoom, we had a Zoom call a couple days ago to set up all of this, and we talked about building while designing was the term that was used. Building while designing. So you guys were designing stuff while you're building the park. That's out of the ordinary, I assume? No, it's not. Bob's like, no, we still do that. But I want to ask more about that and the challenges of this park. We talked about Michael having that Christmas morning syndrome where he'd open it, he couldn't wait to talk about the next idea, and you had to have a meeting the next day. What were the challenges on this project, and talk about building while designing?
Yes. If you were a traditional commercial builder, you hire an architect, he does a complete set of plans, you go take that out to a construction contractor, he does shop drawings as necessary, and then you get it out into the field and you build it. Well, one of the reasons we ostensibly went to design build was that you had one entity who was doing both the designing and the building, so that the builder could tell the architects what they needed first, what drawings they needed, and it would just flow essentially. All that works really well if you're building a commercial product that's predictable and not going to change. We weren't building that. And I think one of the great challenges, and Craig can talk about them as much as I, Bechtel had to completely rethink their process to allow, okay, we know we can commit to this and only this, give you X time, and then they would commit to the next step.
Right. So, that was really the fun and the challenge and the art of doing this was that as the project engineer, I got to sort of schedule all the Bechtel time and the BAR time up in San Francisco. So we designed the project up there, and there were these two realities. There was a Glendale reality, which was going at one pace and maturing at one pace, and there was the San Francisco reality that was going to be what we were ultimately going to build. And so just sort of keeping those aligned and keeping this bunch of racehorses up in San Francisco who just, by tendency, wanted to just, can't you just give me the information once, let me draw it once, and let me get it done? And kind of to add a little bit of the point of the technology, this was the point in time when CAD was starting to be a thing that might be the part of the future. So part of the science project we took on was Integraph, which sort of disappeared in a hurry, and AutoCAD sort of took over. But Bechtel had this notion that we're going to do a fair amount of the project on Integraph. So we got that science project going. We've got the reality in Glendale. We've got the reality in San Francisco. And I think, again, one of those measures of how tight this team was is that I've done this before when it's sheer agony and a bit to go this fast. And it was somehow seamless. We had fantastic people up in San Francisco who sort of got the hang of this over time. And, Glendale was always trying to catch up, but the people we had in Glendale were, it's about casting and meeting reliable commitments to each other. It's a sociology as much as anything else. And we never really felt like we were hanging out that much. It's like, okay, Bob and his people, they got to meet this commitment. Eric, you got to get this done for Great Movie Ride, blah, blah, blah. And so we just we're running 2 races, but we always seem to stay in pace.
And one of the ways we did that was every Friday morning, a group of us would get on a PSA airplane, fly up to San Francisco, and that included Bob and some of the key creative guys, and we would have a work session with Bechtel. And in that, we would work out between us. All right, you need this then, we can't get it to you, and we'd compromise, and we did it as an integrated team as opposed to us just dictating to Bechtel when they could or would get that information.
I'll just add from the design point of view that why you might say this still happens is that what you all see as guests is the last part we do. So there's behind all of that is a building, a foundation, a structure, all those things. And then there's a path that you ride through, which is the part that we spend the most amount of time developing. It's the last part that goes in. So there's always pressure to get because you got so much to do. There's always pressure to get the buildings out early, get them going. And so you end up having to make commitments to the ride path or where sets are going to be or things like that, even if you haven't seen that stuff yet. So the integrated Disney product is in itself a challenge because we never want to take all the time in the world to build projects. You want to build them at some sort of reasonable time frame, and you need time to design all the specialized stuff that we do. Most of the money is spent on what you all see when you go to the park. It's not spent on the basics, and so the care goes into telling the story, and that takes the longest. And so you always have, we should have turned left there a little bit instead of right, and those things are kind of inevitable.
So we're nearing the end of this presentation. I want to, since we're not really going to have this chance throughout these panels, I feel, let's get a little personal. Mostly Eric sent me some candid photos, but I think there's a few from a few others. I don't know if we have those, Jake, if we can pull those up. I'll give you a second to do so. And I need explanations of what we're looking at in some of these photos. There's one I really don't understand. This one I understand, but Eric.
I hope you understand. I hope you understand what that is. No, that was May 1st, 1989, outside the gate of the project. And everybody said I had porn star hair back then. We're going too fast. Wait, stop. That was me being interviewed on the day of the opening by one of the local news crews about the Great Movie Ride. And this is a picture in Glendale. That's me with the giant teeth on the left. And the woman in the middle is I don't remember her name, but she's the voice actress who did Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch for The Wizard of Oz. And then Don Lewis is our audio engineer. Michael Sprout, to her, on that side of her, was the writer for the Great Movie Ride. And Tim Kirk was one of our chief designers for the Great Movie Ride. And that is me at the opening night gala with Betsy Richmond, who's our communications person from Imagineering, pretending to interview me. And that's Kathy Rogers, who's going to be on the panel. She's here today. And this is actually at the opening of Typhoon Lagoon, but I forgot. Kathy reminded me it was the same time frame. It was in the same couple of weeks, yeah. And that's not mine. Whose is that?
I think this is me. Yeah. So just before the park opened, we all decided that we had to test a few things out. So that's Bob, that's me, and I can't tell who else is there. But if you go to the next slide, we decided to go swimming in the lake.
This is the one I wanted explanation.
Now, by the way, if you go there today and ask a cast member, they will let you do that. So I think we have a couple more in the water. That's just that one. Okay, I think that's Brock in the yellow shirt.
That might be for now.
Okay.
I think your Star Tours stuff will be in the Star Tours presentation. Those are a few miscellaneous ones that didn't necessarily fit a certain presentation. But I wanted clarification because in that photo you haven't broken the plane of the water, so I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. But you just at random just decided to jump in.
We did it again at the opening of Typhoon Lagoon. We got into the.
we got in trouble.
That's when we got in trouble, and nobody. We were all kind of the WDI team on the studio tour, and it was opening. Everybody celebrating, and we jump into the Typhoon Lagoon with our clothes on, and nobody knew what to do. So the only person who knew exactly what to do was Dick Nunes.
Yep. You weren't getting an event without a Dick Nunes story.
And I looked up from the waves, and there's Dick Nunes. He says, what did he say? What you remember?
What I remember is he pointed, he said, Eric Jacobson, get the hell out of the water now. But we were at a water park. Come on.
Bunch of drunk people in a water park.
Let's pass Richard a microphone if we can. Yeah.
I'm just talking to these guys. I don't know. We also, not that we had a hell of a lot of free time, but every once in a while there would be these things that would draw our attention, and you had to just do like jump in the water. But we also climbed the Earful Tower. We did that 2 or 3 times, I think. Yeah. It was an open ladder. And then when you got to the top, there was, I don't know, for some reason there was a lot of hornets and wasps up there, so you were kind of stuck. It was the scariest thing I did on that project.
Does anyone have any other stories like that from maybe some fun that was had? No. None were. Oh, Paul.
I just think jumping in Echo Lake was sort of like us baptizing ourselves in the new park. In a way, it was sort of that rite of passage that we could do it.
We all view Gertie as a religious deity, so then I understand.
Well, I do have one last one, I guess, is the Echo Lake, which was based on Echo Park Lake here in Los Angeles, has a lot of ducks in it, and the original idea was to try to emulate that, and I got wind through the operations side that they were not going to put any wildlife in the lake, and they were worried about it because they didn't want any wildlife coming, so they were going to basically say it was not a waterfowl lake. And so when we had our turnover ceremony where we turned the park over to operations, I had gotten a duck from the animal people, and I put it in a little shoebox, and I said, I got a present for Bob Lamb, and I said, Lamb, come down with me, and we walked down to the edge of the water, and I opened the box and put the duck into the water.
She asked, who put the blow-up alligator? There's a blow-up alligator story? Is that a thing?
It was in the water. Yeah. No, the real alligators, though, were out by Cat Canyon in the retention pond, and the construction workers would take their lunch, and they would take half their sandwich and throw into the water. So now the alligators were accustomed to anybody with a white hard hat would come and look for their food. So you had to be careful going out by Cat Canyon because the alligators saw you in a white hat, you were lunch.
Did you have another story? Okay. The interesting thing is, as everyone sent in their bios, I realized there was a lot of overlap. So a lot of you ended up working together again on a number of things, whether it was Disney Sea, Blizzard Beach, New Tomorrowland, the Fantasyland redo, or the Snow White redo at Magic Kingdom, all sorts of, there's so much overlap. Is that intentional? Did you all just get assigned, or did everyone just really, everyone just wanted to work again after how great the experience was on MGM?
Well, the way Imagineering was set up at the time is the creative execs had what we called the portfolio. So Bob's portfolio was, amongst other things, everything in Florida. And so, once we worked with Bob and he knew us and we had a shorthand way we could talk to each other and there was the level of trust, we just tended to seem to work under Bob. And because we were all a small team, like Bob was in charge of Florida, but I worked under Eric because Eric was in charge of like the Magic Kingdom. So anytime we went to the Magic Kingdom, it would go from Bob to Eric, and then, you know, shit rolls downhill, right? So, so I think then I went off to Paris, and then I never saw these guys again. So.
Yeah, no, everyone else stayed away from Paris for some reason. But then a bunch of you went to Japan, though. So.
Well, the building we were in, we moved it back from Florida, and part of the reason, other than the fact that we had great relationships and shorthand and all that, was that we were almost instantly expanding the studio radically. That was coming up with Tower of Terror and, you know, other things to expand the studio. And as that was going on, we were proposing to do a studio, which we didn't end up doing, in Tokyo, and one for Paris as Paris was being built. So part of the reason that we had this little kind of gang that kept working together, we were each of us in our own way were the experts in those topics, and that was really the first year or so after the studio opened. And in addition to expanding the studio, we were doing those other parks at the same time.
I was just going to say, through the experience of working together, all together, and you know what people's strengths are, what their talents are, and you say, okay, we need a really strong show set person for this new project. Well, I worked with them on Disney-MGM Studios, and they'd be great to work on, you know, whatever that might be. So it's sort of organic that way. It's not, I mean, you get lessons, but you know the people that you work with well, and they, you know, the people can mentor other people well to get new team members to arrive. So that's how it works. Okay.
Yeah, I think as fans and guests, we're somewhat in the dark on that process. So thank you for clarifying that. Other thing, someone brought this up yesterday. I'm just going to ask you. You mentioned the studio park for Paris, the studio park for Tokyo, that were envisioned. There was at one point something envisioned for Burbank. There was a small thing across. It was a big thing. I don't even know. A square mile in downtown Burbank.
Yeah, and the very rapidly, Joe Rohde, Rick Rothschild, maybe you also, Craig, worked on it. Yeah, it was the opportunity for Disney to have something in Burbank, a sort of small urban park kind of thing, and the city was very up for it, and it led, I think, very quickly to a live television hearing where we presented it all on live television. I didn't, but you guys did. But it was abandoned as probably too close to Disneyland.
It speaks to what Bob was talking about with Michael and Frank, and just being so enthusiastic. Throw anything out, what sticks to the wall. Some things don't. And that got there and said, well, maybe just no, that's not right. Let's move on to the next thing. But Michael was so enthusiastic and sent so much energy and just getting things going and let's see how far we can take it, and if it works, we do it. If it doesn't, so what? We'll learn a lesson from it.
I think we'll learn a lot more about that at 3:00 with all the unbuilt projects, all the things that were thrown against the wall. Yeah. Anything else in particular anyone wants to share? Any anecdotes or anything as we wrap up about their experience building the park?
One thing that came to mind relative to us being a team that was so close together was there were a couple of different events that occurred while we were all relocated and working hard, but we'd have some free time available. I can remember a trip that Craig Russell put together. We went down to watch the turtles hatch down towards, I can't remember what the beach was, New Smyrna Beach, and a whole group of us went down and saw that. Another group of us took an inner tube ride down the Itchituckney River, I believe it's called, which was a lot of fun and very interesting, especially in Central Florida. All the water I'd ever seen naturally in the lakes was kind of green and kind of warm, and here was crystal clear cold water, and it was pretty very different experience. So, you know, that we did as team members. We worked together and we played together.
We had volleyball, softball.
Yeah.
One additional thought I'd like to share is, I mean, we've talked about how tight this team was, and I think when we got together separately, that to us, to the group who did this, has to do very much with for me personally, the first time in my career I saw such an incredibly strong partnership at the top. So it's kind of obvious that you would think, okay, it's a creative enterprise. it ought to be led by a partnership between somebody who owns the idea and somebody who owns the execution of that idea, rather straightforward. And while it's straightforward, it's the first time in my career I'd seen such deep trust from two leaders, and everything we did really just modeled what Bob and Randy did. We just saw the way they behaved, and Randy made reference in the last session about the sort of Friday liquid chalkboard sessions on value engineering, and I mean, this project had grinding budget problems, and it was very simple. Randy got to, the trust was built because Randy said, we're going into the room and we don't come out until we get to a solution. And Randy had enough trust in Bob to say, Bob could veto anything. Because if it was a stupid idea to make that budget cut, Bob and his team, we all had the trust that they could say, nope, doesn't work. But then back to Randy, we're staying here till we get somewhere. And so we got to see this behavior modeled. And for me personally, since I've had the chance through my career to work on large projects, quite a number of our gates, and also to be sort of in studio leadership. And it was the first time that I saw that partnership that the whole team just sort of modeled themselves by. And it's sort of been the thing that I've held as a truth of what we do, both a large project as well as the way the organization is best run. It was to like start with the idea and execution at the top, and everybody just watch those two people and how they behave. But you got to do it with two people who can trust each other, because otherwise it's a mess. So.
Well, and you add Bruce LaValle to that equation, and you have the cast side of it, and Bruce had to train, I think, 1,200 cast members in time for the opening, and had never gone through things like the Great Movie Ride, where you were not just training cast members, but also trying to teach them how to be actors and things. So the three-way partnership is the best way to work.
Yeah, let me just finish that saying, for all of us on the project, it was a masterclass of leadership, how to run a project, how creativity can manifest itself into something. It was really just the best way I describe it is a masterclass.
The parallels for this company overall are kind of shocking when you really step back and look at it, because the company founding with Walt and Roy was a creative enterprise and a brilliant businessman. And then the rebirth of the company with Michael and Frank was exactly the same thing. It was a brilliant partnership, and these two did exactly that as well. And just one final thought as we're talking about where all these things come from is it is a mutual respect and understanding and appreciation for the specific talents of everybody, because Bob has a great expression called the tumble dryer of design, which is where because there's a schedule, there's a budget, there's a creative vision, there's the physics and technical realities of what you have to do, there's the operational realities in terms of THRC, theoretical hourly ride capacity, and instantaneous guest distributions, and how many restrooms you need, and all of these things need to roll together. And it is always a compromise, and you can. This is a team sport. Nobody goes and designs a theme park. It takes a huge collaborative effort, and people with those varying expertises to all respect and understand one another, to hear them when they say, no, we can't do that because. And if the maintenance guys designed the entire park, it would not look like this. Trust me, because I've worked a lot with those guys, and they just want, I just push a button and it does it its own, the same, and the maintenance is all done automatically. It's great, and all the money goes there. So you have no money for a show because that's all there. So yeah, it would look very, very different, but you have to understand and respect that, and that collaborative spirit and all working together is an incredible experience, and this was a masterclass team in that.
I don't like
I'm
the term,
gonna build
I don't like
on-
the term master class. I call it boot camp.
I'll just build on what Chris was talking about. There was a word that Bob would use in our design process. You use it often enough, but contained within that word were implicit in that one single word that he would use when he was guiding us was a set of budget parameters, scope, good taste, good design, but it was Bob's version of that, and he would use the word, and he would lean back in his chair and he'd go, make it cheesy. Do you remember that? But implicit in those words were not to make it crummy or ugly or bad looking, but cheesy was a guideline, it was a parameter that was just make it good enough where the message got across and it was quality product. But I used to love that description because it took a lot of pressure off. Make it cheesy.
Well, we all love that MGM cheese, and we're gonna dive in very shortly. Thank you all very much. I know in a few moments, stay tuned. We're gonna have Ryan and Valerie, and we're talking about films in a film theme park. So stay tuned.